depressed, make them anxious, make them, subhanAllah, thinking too much, make them so scared to the point that it become a veil that they cannot see the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore it becomes a screen for them to even believe in the wa'd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Surah Ali Imran, the people, those hypocrites in Ghazwat Uhud, قال وطائفة قد أهمتهم أنفسهم يظنون بالله غير الحق ظن الجاهلية. And a group or faction among the army, they were hypocrite. They were, subhanAllah, concerned, all they concerned themselves, how to save themselves. They thinking that the management of the Prophet ﷺ, the way of commanding the army was not right. They thinking that he brought them there just to die. And this is what makes them, subhanAllah, concerning about themselves. And then that's the ham, that's the worry that they are embedded or they brought to themselves to the point they cannot see anything and they're being blinded. Therefore, dear brother, respected sister, this is very close to many of us, this aspect. If we go through difficulties, we'll go to difficulties, we're going to become so scared, so fearing, so worried, and that worry is going to be, subhanAllah, coming as a veil to stop the light of Allah. And the light of Allah, in which is the key for your heart, for the tranquility of your heart, for the success. Now we understand from this ayah, what we can derive as a great lesson from this ayah, as, the fact, the state of your heart toward the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the key to the change and the key to the success. Again, the state of your heart toward the promise of Allah is the key to the change and the key to the success. The more you believe that the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is certain, is going to happen, the more you are having the key, disposing in your hand the key of your success, the key of your tranquility, the key of the change. And the change from a state of disobedience to states of obedience, from states of good to states of better, from a state of someone being, under a bondage to a state of freedom, under colonization to a state of liberation, as our people in Gaza, nasallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala lahum al-nasr. So these elements are very important, because the people who, subhanAllah, they bring the worry to themselves, they become prisoner of their present. And the one who is a prisoner of their present, they will not be able to do anything except to try to find a solution, regardless from where this solution. Certainly this solution cannot come from the future, because they are, subhanAllah, in veil of the future, which is the wa'd of Allah, the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all what they're thinking about is how to find a solution. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us in Surah Al-Ma'idah, those people who have sickness in their heart, the same people who are saying this in the Ghazwat al-Ahzab, they say, قَالَ فَتَرَى الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٌ يُسَارِعُونَ فِيهِمْ. You see the people with sickness in their heart, they are hastening to please those allies. So they are trying to say, well, how they justify that? It said, for misfortune, to avoid any misfortune to befall on us. So subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, you're doing that because of being a prisoner of your present, being prisoner of that difficulty. You feel suffocating and you do not see any hope, because you do not have that insight to help you see in the future that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with you. By dissociating themselves from this great belief that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala providing us, you find them running in all the direction, seeking help, becomes hypocrite, becomes giving down their deen, selling their deen, just for the purpose to avoid any misfortune to strike them. And this is, dear brothers, respected sister, this is what we are seeing today in the world. This is what we are seeing today in the world. Therefore, the believer, when he looks at such a thing, then he needs to liberate himself from such a thing, to make their present, to transform as a power of liberating your future. I'm going to explain all of this because it's very important. Why? Because if you look at the materialistic view or the secular view, how they look to the past. They look to the past as something obsolete. We live in this, time. The people before, they were like less than us in every means. This is how they think. Why? Because the quantification and the evaluation of the condition of life is based on materialistic. We have cars that didn't have cars. We have planes that didn't have planes. Therefore, we are better than them. and the best in our life is what is coming in the future with greater technology and with the science and so on. And this is, subhanAllah, the mentality. This is the frame of mind of these people. The believer is not that way. The believer, he look at the past as a legacy that he's passed down to him, and he going to have it, subhanAllah, inspire him. And he look at the present, at the time of the striving, a time of the striving to change this present as a force to liberate the future. And we say liberate the future, what is impossible in the future. And this is how you'll be able to have the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be fulfilled for you. A believer, for example, if going through difficulty, just giving an example, to help us, focus. A believer, for example, he has a problem, financial problem. The financial problem, he asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help him, to give him, more rizq. That given more rizq is in his mind, is an abstract idea. It's going to turn into dua. Then he's going to stand in the night and making a lot of dua. And that's a dua in his present. This striving is going to unlock the possibility that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him that rizq. So you see the steps, how we believe in the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, the most important aspect is to know the elements that will help us to fulfill such, power, to gain such a power to help us, insha'Allah ta'ala, being driven toward the right future. And the future, when you say the rightful future, is the one in which you seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, the first element that we can put in one concept, that it will be the key of the rightful change and the key to the success of the believer, is this, what the scholar, they call it Quwwatut Tawreeth. Quwwatut Tawreeth is the power of passing down the legacy. So it's not about you, but it's about the next generation. You see, last week we were talking about concepts are like diverting our people from their identity. They're reshaping their identity. They're corrupting their identity. And they put them all, subhanAllah, to be restricted in a very materialistic view. And then they change the deen to be fully secular. Now the believer, when he think about how he can travel to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala safe, be away and avoiding such a system who are corrupting the inner self and corrupting the heart and blinding the inside. How a believer can do such a thing? If we'll think about this concept, which is very important concept, which is Quwwatut Tawreeth. What is Quwwatut Tawreeth? Is the power to bequeath, but the bequeath is being more materialistic way, but to pass down the legacy, the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ, the guidance of the righteous predecessor, the guidance of how you behave and conduct in the way of Allah, so you will help the next generation to continue in the same behavior by fulfilling the mission of the creation or the mission of the vicegerency on this earth. Therefore, the believer thinking big, thinking in this way, he will be able to construct a whole system of thinking, a whole system of implementation, and it helps them to fulfill the change without getting shortcut. A shortcut is going to lead them to corruption and lead them to adhere to a system that only breathes corruption. And this is a reality what we are saying. Now, Quwwatut Tawreeth, this Quwwatut Tawreeth is composed from two powers. The first power is the power of obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second power is the certainty in the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first one, it has really required deep understanding, because I said, how I obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Obeying Allah through the practice of the deen. So when I practice a deen, I feel like obeying Allah. But the question is, how are you practicing your deen? Because you might be practicing your deen exactly as we have described it last week in a secular way. So you are practicing the deen, it becomes like the deen only when you come to the Jumu'ah. When you are outside, in the outside, you live the life of the lifestyle of other people. You think secular, your dreams are secular, you want to have the greatest of the job, you have to have the great money. You come to the Jumu'ah, you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to fulfill your secular objective, but you do not have anything to do with your hereafter. When it comes the hereafter, it's guaranteed you are a believer, insha'Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take you to paradise. That's not the practice of the deen. That we are faking ourselves. using our deen just to give us, superficial satisfaction. But is not that the practice of the deen. Because the practice of the deen requires three components. The first component is to understand what Allah told you. The second component is to understand the reality you live in. The third component is to understand how you're going to implement your understanding of the text or the command of Allah in the reality that you live in. Because the reality of the live-in is going how in a way to modify, to reshape the command, and not to change it, but in a way to embrace the command of Allah for you to fulfill the objective of the command. If Allah, I'll give you a simple example. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordained us to pray, you do pray. But you do not observe any improvement in your character, any improvement into your conduct, any improvement the way you talk to your own kids, or the kids they talk to their parents, or the spouses between each other always screaming and have a problem. What this salah that you are doing? So the salah here is not fulfilling its objective, which is one of the objective intent of the salah, is to improve your akhlaq, it improve your moral, it improve your conduct. Therefore, if you're not doing that and is not helping you, so the salah, that one is ignored by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, the one whose his salah does not enjoin for him good and change him to be a good person and good doing a conduct, then that salat is not salat. And all what he has from the qiyam is sleepless in the night, and all what he has from the prayer is like he's tiring his body. Umar ibn al-Khattab is very important to understand this aspect, because many people they come and they tell you, for example, let's do this, is the less evil. No, there is no such a thing without study and reflection. Because when you say, for example, do this because it's the less evil, or do adhere to this person because it's the less evil, we say such a thing need to be defined from the source of the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not a whims that we feel like, oh, this one hates Muslim, therefore the less evil to go to the other one. That's not the way that we should think. You will not go to a doctor and say, oh, I think you should give me this. No, you're going to listen, and listening to everything that they say. If you want to have a doubt, you go to another one to check, you get another opinion, but you're going to follow what they're going to tell you. And this is when it comes to the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's how the believer should be behaving, and more. And this is just an example. Now, the example of Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, in the year of the famine, people are starving, there is no food, the whole year. And Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he will not even eat unless the poor of the believer, they will be having some food to eat. Then when people are caught stealing and they brought to Umar, he didn't implement on them the punishment of cutting of the hand, the punishment related to the theft. He didn't implement it. Instead, he asked them to take them, to give them food from the home of the storage of the finest of the Muslim. Why? Because the hukum, the ruling of Allah, always have mercy and justice and wisdom. If you implement the punishment in this situation, then it's going to be injustice, because this person, he didn't steal because he's rich, he stole because he's in need, he's starving. And then when they came to Umar, he said, give them food, we're not going to punish them. Because they were like pushed, they were forced to do such a thing. And this is how you implement the command based on the reality you live in. This is how we understand what is good for you and what is bad. But it was good for you, not good for your dunya. Not someone who wants, a better system of tax for themselves. They say this is lesser evil, so we should vote for so and so, for example. They say you cannot do that. This is your own agenda. This is your own justification. You have the right to do whatever you want to do. It's permissible for you. But when you come to make it on the top of the way of Islam, and you want to justify it with the ahkam of Sharia, that's where we start you. They said this is haram, because you have all this analysis, the understanding of the text, the understanding truly of the reality, and then the understanding how you're going to implement the command of Allah in the reality you live in, with the objective to fulfill the intent of the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the command that He commanded you, that the example that we gave for the salah. then that's when it becomes like clear for you what is the maslahah. Because the benefit for the believer is his success in his deen, and then comes the livelihood. It's not the livelihood and the deen. When you make a istikhara, you ask Allah, Ya Allah, if this is good for my religion, for my faith, and then my dunya. You don't say my dunya and my deen. So the maslahah, when you think about what is evil for the believer and what is good for the believer, is not quantified about someone who loves Muslim or does not love Muslim. You are quantified about your journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what will help you in your journey to Allah, not on what you think you're gonna get by just pure assumption and done and conjecture. It does not have any foundation, any analysis. This is bring us the way how to implement. This is the fourth component in this obedience of Allah, which is how you're going to implement it. You implement it based on a frame of mind, based on the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the way we have explained it. And this is going to be by seeking excellence in everything. This is the way of the ihsan of the believer. So if you are studying with the frame of mind, you are obligated to seek excellence. If you are in business, if you are in inventing such a great thing that you might help the humanity, you will do it, and you are required to do it within the frame mind and the structure, intellectual structure that is guide you in the way of the ihsan that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His Messenger they have described and clarified in the Quran and the Sunnah. This is how then you change the present in a power to liberate for you the possibles. Because when you say, oh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised me, this is abstract. How are you going to be fulfilled? By working so hard. That's the obedience. By working so hard, by striving in the path of the ihsan, in the way of the ihsan. That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you. The believers, when they came to the limit of their effort, that's when they said, when is the help of Allah? In Surah Al-Baqarah. حتى يقولوا النبي والذين آمنوا معه متى نصر الله. This is only the time when they asked, when is the help of Allah? Why? Because they did everything that they can within their power. That's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help you. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, He said the help of Allah is near. It's near to you because you already did everything that it's supposed or required to do. But for us, if you want rizq, if you want success, if you want this, if you want change, if you want liberation for our people in Gaza, and so on, there is that action. And this action, we are seeing it with our own eyes. And subhanAllah, is what the resistance is doing, is exactly that type of obedience that will help you to bring you the success and bring you the change. Next, dear brother, respected sister, comes how much you believe into the wa'd of Allah. How certain you believe that Allah is going to fulfill it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, He's going to bring the help. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, He's going to give you victory. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, I'm going to defend you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, I'm the one who's responsible of provision, and the provision of your kids, and the provision of your offspring, and the provision of all the animals around you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking care of them. So if you have the certainty in your heart of such a promise of Allah, which is actually part of His attribute, therefore if you have a question mark about it, which is like doubting the attributes on the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, boosting your iman to have full certainty in the promise of Allah is actually an obligation of the iman. So when you have such confidence and trust and certainty that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to fulfill for you all what He's promised you, this is what is going to have. What is its impact? Its impact that you're going to feel so good. You're going to feel filled with hope. Even wallahi, you don't have anything to eat. If you don't have any shelter, if you don't have anything, Allah will make you feel good. As you see it, subhanAllah, how the resilience of these people in Gaza is like, subhanAllah, they've been created from different structure like the rest of the people. Why? Because they have this yaqeen. And this yaqeen, which is give you the boost into your heart, strengthen your heart, give you strengthen your willpower, give you that resilience, give you that tawakkul, give you that trust, give you that confidence, because the yaqeen is what is going to nurture your hope. And that are the two components which make the future and the possible that you have ahead you a key to it, a key. So the believers, by this power of passing down, this quwwat tawrithi, he had the key of the change. And this is how you're going to be a great example for the other, for the next generation. They will not listen to you if you do not act upon it. When you act upon it, when you say, don't be scared, you're going to be successful. Don't be scared. I see in you, if you do this, a full success. I'll see, inshallah, Allah will give us help. I'll see, as Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah ta'ala, when they were facing the army of the Mongolian, he said, inshallah, we're going to win. And then he said, I'm not saying inshallah in a way ta'liq, pending, suspending. No, I'm saying inshallah tahqiqan. لا تعليقا تحقيقا, which is mean like with the will of Allah we're gonna win with no doubt. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them victory. Allah gave them victory. The two examples that I want to share with you, to give us, immersion and understanding of this power of tawrith, a power of inheriting, or like not inheriting but passing down the legacy down to the next generation. Because when you pass it to the next generation, and what that becomes a vehicle to you to really, and a drive to you, not just to pass it for the next generation, but also for you, actually mainly for you, to keep you strong and keep you hopeful and keep you always driven toward hasten, toward the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in al-Hijrah, and you can take the study of the Hijrah, compare it to the journey of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to the night journey and the ascension to the heaven and the earth. Ascension to the beyond the seventh heaven. It's totally different of the Hijrah. The journey, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him a mount that is a miracle, and he went to Al-Quds, from Mecca to Al-Quds, in the blink of an eye. Now, the Hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ took him days. Why? Because in the Hijrah, the Prophet ﷺ was our role model. No one will ask Allah to give him al-buraq to travel or to face difficulties. No, the Prophet ﷺ went through the difficulties. And went through difficulty to show us the peak of ihsan. He even bought his mount from the Abu Bakr. And he put the plans, and he went off the path of the Medina, and he went to be hiding into the cave of Thawr. And then he traveled, and it was, subhanallah, very hardship. I mean, it was a hardship, and it was like, harsh travel. And then when Suraqa interceded them, and he went to, as you know, there is a price on the head of the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr. And he came to them, and he could not come close to the Prophet ﷺ. He's the only one who could find them. What the Prophet ﷺ told him, he said, "Ya Suraqa, won't you not be pleased to have the bracelet of Kisra?" This is so shocking. Do you know what it means, the bracelet of Kisra? It's like someone, down in one town, small neighborhood in Africa, people, finally, hardly they can find food, and say to someone, he said, should I, promise you the bracelet of the king of so-and-so? That does not make sense, and that's why the hypocrite, they said, this is a delusion. But subhanAllah, Suraqa, who was not believer at that time, he believed in the Prophet ﷺ because he saw the miracle that he could not even get close to the Prophet ﷺ. Every time he wanted to go to the Prophet ﷺ, the feet or the legs of the horse sank down into the sand. And he accepted. And this is, dear brother, respected sister, this is the power of the passing down of the legacy of the Prophet ﷺ. To tell us that he did all what he can do in striving, all what he can do in, subhanAllah, putting all his effort, all what he can do to be the role model for all of us. And then what happened? He said he had then to say this wa'ad, this promise to the Prophet, the promise to Surah. The next one, the next example is in Ghazwat al-Ahzab. Jazakallah khair. The next one in Ghazwat al-Ahzab. And in Ghazwat al-Ahzab, this is the ayah that we have mentioned, how they were saying that the Prophet ﷺ is a delusion. The Prophet ﷺ, as Al-Bara ibn Azib said, that when they were like, digging the ditch, a big rock, a boulder came and they could not break it. They could not break it. So they went to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ they gave him the pickaxe and he said Bismillah and he hit. The first hit, it broke into 3 pieces. I mean, he broke 1/3 of it. And he said, Allahu Akbar. I said, I have been given the keys of Hashem, which is mean the conquest with Hashem. The second time he saw and he can see from his place the palaces of the Persia. And the third time the palaces of Yemen. In very difficult time, the Prophet ﷺ in this ghazwa, he was tying a stone around his stomach. But the same thing, dear brother, respected sister, to be our role model. He did the whole obedience the way that it should be. He strove, ﷺ, the best of the striving to fulfill and to submit to Allah. Then it becomes, that wa'ad, that promise becomes certain. This is how it put in the heart of the believer that strong hope. This is what drives them to be the strongest and the best human in the world as being the companion of the Prophet ﷺ. Therefore, developing this power of passing down help us to be a good role model for others, for our children, for our siblings, for our friends, for others, even non-believers. And then you're going to be a source of giving people a boost of hope, because you're going to tell them, they're going to see always in your face that joy, that glamour of subhanallah, of shining face. And you're going to say, do not be worried. لا تحزن, Allah is with you. لا تحزن, don't be sad, Allah is going to help you. Do not fear, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send you the relief. And they will believe you because you say it from a strong heart. This is how you're going to help people and help yourself be steadfast in the path. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على النبي المصطفى أما بعد. The difficulty that the believer they went through in Ghazwat al-Ahzab, to the point Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned how they been deeply shaken, inwardly deeply shaken, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala قال وَزُلْزِلُوا زِلْزَالًا شَدِيدًا. However, their firmness, the way we have mentioned, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them this power of passing down, a power to be a role model, a power to persevere, a power to endure, a power to have that hope that is derived from the certainty in the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you do so, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will provide you the greatest triumph, the greatest success. The greatest triumph and the greatest success is not to take back lands, is not to win or to gain more money. No, the greatest success is in your heart. Is the increase of faith in your heart and the increase of your submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is what He told us about the believer. You heard what the hypocrite they have said. And the believer they said, وَلَمَّا رَأَى الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الْأَحْزَابَ. And when the believer they saw the Confederate army, they knew they do not have enough power to face them. What they have said, they said, هَذَا مَا وَعَدَنَا اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. This is what Allah and His Messenger have promised us. And what He has promised them, to have a defeat, to fight people more than them? No. He promised them if they put all their effort, then the help will come. Certainly, this is subhanAllah, that certainty in their heart. And then to appease their heart, they said, وَصَدَقَ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. And Allah and His Messenger are saying the truth. Not like the people who have sickness in their heart, they said He promised as delusion. قال, and this is where comes the success, this is where comes the triumph. قال وما زادهم. Such a statement, such position, it increased them in faith, and it increased them in obedience, and it increased them in the way that they worship Allah, they love Allah, submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these are the people that Allah, that He loves, and they love Him. So therefore, if you want to be from the group, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, يُحِبُّهُمْ وَيُحِبُّونَهُ, you have to develop in you this power of passing down, to be a good role model and to give to other people that boost of hope based on your certainty in the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah instill in our heart the certainty and the belief certainly in the promise that He promised us, and in the promise that came in the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a hadith. اللهم ارزقنا اليقين في قلوبنا يا أرحم الراحمين، واقذف في قلوبنا رجاءك، وقطع رجاءنا عمن سواك، حتى لا نرجو أحدا غيرك. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا أجمعين، وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. اللهم يا رب العالمين، يا عزيز يا حكيم، يا عزيز يا حكيم، احفظ إخواننا في غزة وفلسطين والشام. اللهم احفظهم بحفظك، اللهم ارحمهم برحمتك، اللهم أنزل عليهم سكينتك، اللهم أفرغ عليهم صبرا، اللهم ثبت أقدامهم وانصرهم على المعتدين الظالمين. إنك على كل شيء قدير وبالإجابة جدير. نعم المولى ونعم النصير. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. وأقم الصلاة يرحمكم الله.